Okay, I still see some folks joining, but we will certainly go ahead and get started. We have a lot to cover today. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to NCACPA's Future of Volunteerism Virtual Town Hall. I'm Shawana Hudson, this year's NCACPA Board Chair, and on behalf of the board and staff, I thank you for sharing an hour of your busy morning with us to engage with your association on this very exciting topic. We understand that we all approach volunteerism from different perspectives. Some have been long-serving committee members or leaders for years. Others are looking for opportunities to serve the profession or our community in a meaningful way for the first time. Wherever you stand in your journey, I'm certain you'll hear some information today that will energize you. We also expect, especially if you're hearing this information for the very first time, that you will have some questions, and that's fantastic. We encourage you to ask those in the chat, and we'll have an open discussion at the end so that we can answer some of those in real time. So what will we cover today? And more importantly, why? Today, we will share the recommendations of the Committee Restructure Task Force, or CRTF, a committee and a committed group of volunteers like many of you who have studied the optimal structure to align volunteer activities with the association's evergreen strategy. And that strategy is grounded in our vision of being a highly valued accounting profession. To build that value, we must evolve and expand and enhance the market-facing activities of the association. And we believe the CRTF recommendations will help us do just that. So, with us to explain more about how we got here and the path forward is none other than Scott Showalter, our past board member and past NCACPA chair and the chair of the Committee Restructure Task Force, among other task forces. So, Scott?
Great. Thank you, Shawana. Thank you very much. And I want to repeat what Shawana is. Thanks for joining us today. We understand it's a very, very busy time for you, and we want to thank you for that. I hope you had a chance to read the article that Holly sent out to you. If you didn't, you may have seen it in yesterday's electronic version of the interim report that went out. And kudos to Shawana and her article and cover related to that as well. My role today is really to prime the pump per se. As Shawana mentioned, we really want to find out what's on your mind, what questions that you have. So I'm going to spend first few minutes, assuming that you've read the article, but covering some of the highlights with that. And so as I'm going through that, if there's something that wasn't clear to you, if it's something your committee's already talked about in certain ways and you want to get some more guidance on, please jot that down. Because after I finish, Swana's going to come back on. She's going to kind of moderate our Q&A. We actually have some of the committee members with us today as well. So we're here to answer the questions that you have related to the new face of volunteerism, as we're calling it. And we may not be able to answer all your questions. There may be to-dos that we take away, maybe things that you're asking that we haven't thought about. And so please, either in chat or whatever, please get those questions to us so we can talk about it. So some of you are committee chairs, some of you are committee volunteers, and understand some of you may be people that's never even volunteered before for the association. So I hope by the end of our time today, if you are one of those individuals that are new to volunteerism in the association, that you find a spot that you say, that's where I want to be with that. So as Shawana mentioned, I'm going to go through and talk a little bit about what the task force recommended that the board accepted. And again, I'm going to be kind of high level, but feel free to ask questions. And so, score a rhetorical question, but what do all these organizations have in common? And some of you may not recognize them at all, depending on your age. Okay, but generally, these were all organizations that were at the top of their game And for various reasons, not all the same reason, but for various reasons, they're no longer with us. And so they were no longer sustainable as an organization, again, for a variety of different reasons. But did those organizations really have a forward-looking focus? Shawana mentioned our evergreen strategy. Were they really looking forward to anticipate what was coming down the route? So a lot of what your association has been doing is looking down the road to look at what those trends are, both within the accounting profession itself, broadly defined, but equally important, what is coming down the road related to associations? People's attitudes about joining association and paying dues and what they expect from the association, that is changing, as well as the association, the profession itself. So being prepared for that and making sure we're making decisions to ensure the long-term sustainability of your association is a lot what this is about. So in a nutshell, what's being changed? It is because of the changes in the profession and associations in general that we thought it was important to be able to meet the broader needs of the constituency. So we thought the volunteer effort need to be moved from one which is really event focused. If you think about, for those of you that are committee chair or in a committee, if you think about what you're doing currently, it's more probably about, well, we're in charge of this event or this particular activity. And by the way, that's not going to go away in what we're talking about. What we're talking about is expanding that role and looking at the various markets that the association is serving and saying, how can you take a bigger role is really what we're putting forth to you. So why do we do this? Why do we do this? Is that this has actually been on the to-do list for a little while. Just want to mention task forces. One of the earlier task forces the association had on governance effectiveness had a lot of various things. A lot of things you've been seeing over the last 3 or 4 years actually was in that playbook first laid out by that task force. More recent than that, the association's vision and mission statements came out as part of the transition. And it talked about several things. It talked about expanding who we serve. It talked about maybe not even having to be a member. The association provides a lot of services, and maybe people don't want to be a member, but they do want to participate in the services. And not being geographically bound. Okay, why can't people in other states participate in the services that our association has? So if you really looked and peeled the onion back on that the association vision and mission, it was really about opening up opportunities for the association and people that with the association. And if you've been on a committee in any way at all, either as a chair or that, you know, there's some challenges with the current committee structure as to size, direction, all those types of things. Okay, and so we thought this would be an opportunity to also address some of those issues as well. And for you, this may have appeared to have dropped out of nowhere, but it has actually been going on for a little while. I'm not going to talk about each one of these efforts here, but you can see there's been a variety of task forces where the association's been taking steps, moving in the direction of where we are today. And it all has to do with the sustainability of the association and aligning everything. Think about your own business, whatever type of business you're in. And it's very important to have all the rows in the water, all rowing in the same direction. And that's the way to think about where your association has been with these efforts. So specific to the task force, we spent the last year figuring out where we want to go. And phase one was, what should it look like? So a lot of what I'm going to be showing you is actually coming out of phase one. Phase two was operating. How should it operate? Because one of the things, again, back to the committee structure, is there was inconsistency about maybe how one committee worked versus another, or how transition worked, how leadership worked. There wasn't really necessarily consistency across the whole association about how the committee structure works. So we wanted to come up with some more standard operating procedures, and that came about in phase two. Phase three, which I always said was going to be the heavy lift, is okay. This is what you want to do, then how are we going to do it? How are we going to pull it off? And so a lot of the implementation work was done for most of 2021, where we are right now. And then all a very important handoff of the recommendations to actually the NCACPA staff for the implementation. It isn't that the task force isn't around to help out, but this is an association-wide effort. And so now it moved from the task force into the association staff and leadership to be able to implement what we're talking about. So what is being implemented? And so we came up with the concept of resource groups. So one of the questions we get is, why resource groups? I like the committee, okay? A committee, as we said earlier, was mainly focused on an event or an activity, whereas a resource communicates a broader responsibility than just a committee, I'm working on this particular activity. So it was very deliberate that we moved from calling the volunteer groups from a committee to a resource group because of what's expected. And as I showed you, there were 3 quadrants, just the way we think about them: markets, technical, and association-wide. If you look down the left-hand side here, you'll see these are the markets the association serves. One of the things that task force talked about and engaged with the board is, well, what are the various markets in which the association serves? And so you can recognize these. Some of these were the association is pretty deep in already. Some may be new to you in that area. As a matter of fact, I think your first 4, you will see the association has been involved in some extent in those various degrees. The last 2 are probably new. Advisory consulting related is not the advisory consulting related to public accounting, but we have a lot of members and individuals that are CPAs and not CPAs in the accounting profession that actually have advisory consulting related services and are not in public accounting. So we saw that as an underserved market. In education, we currently do that. In this case, we've combined it. So we have the educators and we have the students. In this case, when we talk about education, we really mean the larger group of both students and educators. So this is the markets. So this is the opportunity for the association, who the association can serve. On the right-hand side, you'll see responsibilities. One of the things we did observe about the old committee structure was all the committees didn't operate the same, didn't have the same responsibilities. Some of it had to do with what they were responsible for, but some of it was just history on the way it was. So we came up with, so each one of the resource groups, responsibilities is what's listed on the right-hand side. Because of the resource groups at different levels of maturity right now, some of them are brand new, some of them have been around a long time, they will be at different areas of this. But generally, these are the responsibilities that we are charging the resource groups. And immediately, response we get, boy, that is lots broader than that one event I used to do being on that particular committee. I will stop right now and say all the committees that the association have are included in one of the resource or network groups, except for 2. And one is professional development and one was membership. And the reason that those are no longer necessary is actually they're incorporated into the responsibilities of the resource groups. We felt people that understood those markets would be better at understanding the professional development needs of that group and also identifying members in that area. So that's why we took that from a kind of a cross or more generic to really people that know those markets in that areas. Okay. On the technical side, you'll see nothing really new here on the technical side as far as the groups that are listed. Accounting, peer review, those are the committees we have. So those become the technical resource groups. And responsibilities, again, these responsibilities are very similar to the ones I showed earlier on the market side, except for peer review, obviously, is a little different from that item. And this group will be more focused on technical standards and responding to technical standards. But if you really were an eagle eye on the previous slide, you will actually say it is still okay for our resource groups on the market side to comment about technical standards. There may be, for example, something coming out in the government sector that particularly that group wants to be able to comment on that particular standard coming out by GASB, or something FASB's coming out with not-for-profits or whatever it may be. So if you reflect back on those responsibilities on the resource groups for markets, you'll see there's not an exclusion to responding on the technical side. These groups are focusing on technical side as far as accounting, attestation, peer review, employee benefits, and tax. And you also see advocacy here. And so clearly advocacy goes a lot with tax, but there may be advocacy opportunities for employee benefits, peer review, and other opportunities as well. So you see a lot of commonality with responsibilities between the resource groups, technical and marketing, but how they put it together will be different based on whether they're market facing or technical. There was a third group of resource groups, and we call them association-wide because they really didn't fit in the other two groups, to be totally honest. Some of them already exist. You'll see advocacy here. You'll see young professionals. You can say, we don't have a young professional group. Yeah, we have young CPA cabinet. And consistent with the vision and mission of where the association is expanding beyond just CPAs, the name of that was changed to young professionals. So this is still with the same objectives as the young CPA professional cabinet, but in this case focused, you don't necessarily have to be a CPA to be part of this. You just need to be a participant in the accounting profession to be able to be with that. And you'll see some new groups here: innovation, emerging technologies, the interim report editorial board, and diversity, equity, inclusion. When it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, I'm sure many of you are aware of the ongoing efforts the association is having in this area. So as we were coming through with the task force, we identified areas we thought diversity and inclusion would be appropriate, but really the work of that group will ultimately define what this looks like. But we thought there were some places that made some definite sense, and we've indicated those as we've gone through, but more will be coming out on that as that group continues to work in that area. So we have resource groups that break into three areas: market, technical, and association-wide. And we also have community and networking groups. So some of you may be parts of this already. And again, if you look on the right-hand side, you'll see women initiatives, you'll see students, SOAR would be in that. You see financial planning and geography. Those are the ones that currently exist. So these people that come together because they have an interest in a particular topic based on geography, or it may be an interest like women's initiatives and that area. And I personally think this is going to be one of the real gems that comes out of the reorganization. Not that I think the resources are great, and I think that's going to focus volunteerism and really help move the association. What I think the community and network groups are going to do is to improve the connectivity of the association with members and non-members, just people in the accounting profession itself. For example, if I'm a woman in Charlotte, I go participate in that women's initiative. That may be my first initial contact with NCACPA is through a networking group. And I may like what I see, and I'd like to do this a little more. So how do I get more involved? And maybe then I drift over into a resource group, and then maybe actually even become a member and other types of things. So there's community and network groups is really the tentacles of the association going out to be able to engage. And you see the major responsibilities to share information and promote events where they get together and talk about whatever their common is, or learn about whatever their common interest is in that area. So that's a high level, I warned you, a high level coverage of what we're proposing. And so these are some benefits we see in this restructuring. One is it's market focused. And it really provides ability for the association to meet a lot broader set of needs than currently having these one-off events. It also extends the services of the association to members, non-members, into CPAs and non-CPAs, people that in other geographies. So it is, again, aligning with what the vision and mission is from that. And so having groups thinking about what those needs are will put us in a lot better position to be able to meet those needs going forward. The activities of the resource groups networks will be aligned with each other. There doesn't necessarily have to be a networking group to align with each resource group, and it won't necessarily be a resource group aligned with every networking group, but where there is, it would be nice to have some alignment in those so they can actually support each other in the efforts and learn from each other in what they're doing. And we think the benefit was, again, the expanded influence of the association through these networking groups. I see that as a real positive item. Okay, and the network groups will have some designated support from the NCCBL staff, and again, that clearer linking. So there's a series of benefits here that not only benefit the association, but we think benefit current members as well as future members, and then those in the accounting profession at large. We think there's a lot to benefit here. I mentioned earlier that one of the things we did in phase 2 of the task force was come up with some operating procedures. We view this as a draft. We fully anticipate other ideas and suggestions to come up, and we will be willing to update this as appropriate. But we sat down and thought about how should these resource groups work? How should how should these networking groups work? What are the roles and responsibilities of what's the role of the chair? What's the role of a vice chair? You go, I didn't know we had vice chairs. Well, some committees did, some didn't. So we're recommending going forward, there should be a vice chair role. Again, that's for more leadership transition from that. But you'll see, we've described here the various roles and responsibilities of what we expect the committees to do, what leadership to do, as well as NCCP staff. And that, so that will be a resource to you as a volunteer to help you. And again, if you do have any suggestions, please help us with that. And the last item we actually developed, and it was the code of conduct. To be totally transparent, we didn't make it up. We actually found it. This task force did a lot of work looking around what other associations did, not only CPA associations, but other associations as well. And we came across a volunteer code of conduct that we thought was pretty good, and we did edit it to some extent, but it really helps create an expectation. If you're going to be a volunteer in this association, what do you expect me to do? And so it's very clearly laid out in this code of conduct. So I think it will help you recruiting volunteers. It'll help you creating expectations for the volunteers that are in your resource group or network working group from that. The role of the NCACP staff was also clarified and in this restructure as well. And so you saw that I mentioned earlier that professional development and membership coordinate groups have sort of gone away in the structure because we put those responsibilities into the individual resource groups and networking groups. But that puts the NCCPA staff in the middle as a major coordinating factor here. Sharing information between the resource groups, sharing information with the networking groups, sharing information with the board of directors. If you've been around a little while, you know we had board liaisons. But again, to be totally transparent, and there's probably, I'm sure, a lot of board members on this that either current or in the past was saying, what did you really want me to do in that role? I really didn't know what you wanted me to do. And so we actually eliminated the board liaison role per se. It doesn't keep a board member from being on a resource group. I've been very much involved in my various roles on the board with the educators group because that's where I sit. And there's nothing that prohibits any board member from reaching out to a particular resource group or networking groups to be in there. But the main communication will be through the NCCP staff. They participate in most of the meetings anyway. Again, what we're trying to do is open up and have clear communication channels up and down the entire organization. So that will be the main role of the NCCP staff. And Mark's worked very hard reorganizing the NCCP staff to reflect what we're talking about today, to make sure the resources are aligned with the various structure that we are talking about. So how are we going to get this done? How are we going to get this done? The main thing, keep a date in mind as we're going forward in this conversation. May 2022. Okay, so May 2022 is our planned full implementation date. Now, I say full, but even then we'll still have some things that will be moving forward on it that will be totally implemented. But that's what we're focused on right now, is what we are seeing in front of you to be primarily implemented by May of 2020. So how are we going to get there? So what I'm going to show you in the next two slides is how we're going to get there. If you think about it, May and July, which we're almost at the end of July here, it's been really focused on communication. So a lot of events you see listed there is about communication. I'm sure some of you participate in the Leadership Series Event 1, and you'll see we have some other ones coming up down the road as well. But two things to keep in mind is we still need to keep doing what we're doing. And so whatever committee you're working on, whatever events that you historically have done, you will keep those up for this year. So it's kind of like spinning plates here. We got to keep the one plate in the air of what we have been doing, and we're going to put a new plate in the air, and we're going to spin that. That's going to be, what do we want to be in 2022? And so if you look on the May, July, you'll see develop roles and responsibilities for the resource group. So one of the things we want to get accomplished is some clarity about what each one of the resource groups are going to look at and what their primary responsibilities will be May 2022. And again, the responsibilities are laid out, but the extent of how those apply to each resource group is up to the resource groups to actually work through that. So you see a combination. So that's the first new item that we're developing as we go forward. The rest of this is consistent with what we're doing, and you'll see Mark has reassigned NCCP staff to align with this. Then we move to the next quarter, August and October, and we're gonna have another leadership series event, number 2. The purpose of the leadership event, by the way, is to help you, the volunteers, as we move through this process. So if you did participate in event one, you know, some of what I'm telling you now is redundant, but as they tell me again, and maybe a third time I'll figure it out. And that's what I tell my students anyway. And so that helps. So some of that you've seen before. But we also talked about what we expect to happen over the next quarter. So again, we'll use the event leadership 2 to be able to talk about what's going to be expected in August and October. Also to hear from you, what is working, what's not working, what do we need to adjust? Again, we want to create an open communication with you. And since we know the roles and responsibilities of the resource groups identified in May and July, then in August and October, what we want to talk about is what do we want to accomplish in 22-23? So what do we want to accomplish next year? Since we know our responsibilities, what do we want to accomplish? And we also need to talk about term limits implementation plan. I'm going to come back and talk about term limits. And I know that's some concern, and we want to make sure we get your questions answered with that. But I want you to keep this in mind when we talk about term limits and the implementation on term limits. We're talking about this, put another date out there, May 2025. So on May 2022, we want each resource group to have an implementation plan on how they're going to implement the term limits over the next 3-year period, because what we've got is 3-year term limits. And so we want to be in a position to have that fully implemented within that 3-year period of time. I'm going to come back and talk about term limits, but August, October is where you want to be related to action plan and term limits. So what we're going to do November and January, now since we know what the resource groups are going to do, we need a budget. And this is very much aligned with the association's normal budgeting process. And so we're going to be putting the budgets together for 2023. We will make sure we know what the going forward leadership each resource group. And we need to be talking about volunteers, recruiting volunteers for that resource group. So a lot of work in that area. So when we come to February and April, which is that last home stretch, as we're getting ready to go into May, we're going to have another leadership summit. We got a leadership summit. We had a leadership series in 3 again to help us. We're going to have that leadership summit. Again, we're coming together to talk about how we're going to be implementing this, deal with those last questions, sharing best practices about how we move forward in the February and April. You know how it is. This is where all the last minute details have come together. So like completing the punch list on your house is where we're going to be in February and April as we go through that. Some key implementation activities we've had, a lot of them is on communication. A lot of it's providing direction on that area. So you definitely see an increase in communication with you on this. It will continue from this. We have a couple of pilot groups. We have some committees that are that their transition to resource groups we thought would help demonstrate to others what we had in mind. So we've identified some pilot groups to help kind of go a little quicker than the other ones, so we can learn from them. Mark's put together some great materials that will help you along the way. One is some white papers, resource groups, networking implementation guide, as well as pathways guide. And I'll come back and talk about that. We have SWAT teams of NCCBS staff that are available when an issue comes up to go in and help do that. And the association, as well as the resource groups, a renewing emphasis on recruiting volunteers. So what have we done so far in May and July? So we've done a lot of communication. And so the last remaining things is continue to keep going on what we're doing for the current year activities and getting clarity on what is the resource groups going to do in 2022-23 as we go on forward. So you've seen a real focus on communication so far as we've gone in. So before I go to Q&A, I want to tee up some implementation challenges. These 5 items that I've got listed here have come up in various conversations. I've mentioned earlier, we've done a lot of communicating. So in that, we've heard from people, well, this works for me, or this doesn't work for me, or more importantly, I don't understand something. And so let me talk about each one of these briefly, and I know we're going to get in more in Q&A. So I just want to kind of prime the pump on this one. But we're going to need your help on all these areas on implementation. So the resource group term limit. So why did we do that? I'm going to give you 3 words or 3 concepts. 1 is opportunities. 2 is new ideas. And 3 is excitement. So one thing that drove us was giving more people opportunities to be able to have a role in the association. And when you don't have term limits, people sort of camp in committees because it feels comfortable. It feels like home. And it's good. And there's a lot of advantages of that, but some of the disadvantages of that is just what I said. Other people looking for opportunities, looking in and saying, I don't see a place for me. No new ideas. How many times have you been in committee and you come to the next year and everybody looks down and says, well, I guess we can do what we did last year. And sometimes you be honest, you get kind of bored of what you're doing, and maybe the excitement kind of comes out of it. So anytime, just like your own organization, where you bring new blood into doing something, you get people feel like, yeah, I want to contribute to that. I'm a little excited about that. And so you get a lot of energy. So that was why one of the primary drivers of the term limits is to expand the opportunities for volunteers to have a leadership position within the association. As I mentioned earlier, the full implementation of the term limits is May of 2025, but we're asking each group to have a plan in place at 2022, so we know which members are going to stay for how long and whatever that is. So that's what we mean by the implementation plan. A couple items to keep in mind is we're only rotating members off for 1 year, so you're not gone forever. Okay, so if that resource group is the love of your life and something you really just had a passion for, go off, do something else. I'm going to talk about that in a minute, and come back with renewed energy back into that. That's fine. And you're also not totally gone. If the resource group you're working on, if there's some particular information that a particular former committee member had that's really important, it's okay to talk to them. It's okay to do that. Okay, so it's not you kicked off the island and never come back. There's some opportunities to be able to do this. So I hope you understand why we went through the term limits. It's mainly to create new ideas, to create excitement, and for opportunities for more volunteers. Likewise, for committee, we also put term limits on committee chairs as well, for a lot of the same reasons. But more importantly, is in the area of leadership. A lot of organizations, a lot of accounting firms, a lot of industry government look to the association to help provide leadership opportunities for their employees. And so if we're not turning the leadership chairs over like we're creating spaces in the committees, then there's not going to be those opportunities for those individuals. And that's a real benefit the association provides to a lot of organizations. So we wanted to make sure those opportunities continue to be there. So again, we need to think about the change there as well. Again, it doesn't mean you can't come back on it some later date. Absolutely, you can. The pathways for volunteers is sort of tie back in. I mentioned earlier that Mark put together a really great document to say, what are the various things I can do in this association? And so I asked you that when your time comes up and you rotate off a resource group, think about, well, what can I do now? Maybe you have a particular skill that you can say, you know, I've always wanted to maybe go work in that area. And so lend your expertise, lend your experiences to another resource group or another networking group. As I mentioned earlier, if you'd like to get back to that resource group after a year, opportunity will be there if that resource group has an opening at that point. So we ask that you use the opportunity, if you're a new volunteer coming in, to look at the Pathways document and say, where can I play here? Where can I add value? Where can I help advance the accounting profession? And whether you're coming off a resource group, use that as an opportunity to try something. Use that as an opportunity to meet some new people. Use that as an opportunity, maybe learn something you didn't know about. Maybe join a group that you say, I'd like to know about that. I'd like to maybe be a little more technical. Maybe I want to get in one of those technical resource groups. So use it as a chance to broaden your horizons. Implementation network steering groups. Some of the network groups have steering groups, some do not. So we realize we've got a chicken egg here where we have to form those. And so we'll be forming network steering groups as we go forward. And I mentioned earlier about the connectivity between the resource groups and networking groups. We want to make sure those are connected. They're not isolated islands. So where there are resource groups, network groups in the same space, making sure there is a connectivity. We've got to work that out because that works for them. So Tawana, I will now turn it back to you and to MC any questions. I'll see some things coming in Q&A, but I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks so much, Scott. That was a lot of information, and even sitting where I am, having heard this information a couple of times, I still get some nuggets there that I'm even more energized about. We were talking about opportunities for folks to really get engaged and kind of stretch themselves and learn about different technical aspects, to volunteer in new and different ways. So we do have some questions that have come through, both through the chat and through the Q&A. I would invite those who have burning questions that there's still an opportunity to put those in there. But I will start with a question from Lonnie. Lonnie is out in Western North Carolina. We'll be out there in September, Lonnie, actually for a BNI conference. So hopefully we'll get a chance to see you in Asheville. But Lonnie's question is, in Western North Carolina, we've had a very small group of volunteers out of about 700 plus members. Getting volunteers is a real challenge. How can we have a steering committee if we can't even get enough volunteers to support events? Scott, can you speak to that?
Great, good question. Okay, we think it comes from two directions. I'll kind of go from the top and the bottom. The association, and we've looked around for some best practices on how associations promote volunteerism. Okay, what we've heard from some people is I didn't know there was an opportunity to do anything. You know, when I looked, that group seemed to be self-contained, they did everything, and I really didn't figure out how to break in to that group. So we've heard some people that it was really hard to sort of step in there. And so we want to do so I'll call it marketing promotion, to be able to let people know where the opportunities are and be very deliberate about that. Instead of assuming people just know, we want to be very deliberate about that process. The other thing was we will help the networking groups, we will help the steering groups come up with their own initiatives to be able to, for example, having access to who are those 700 people and how do we reach out to them? Okay, so that's going to be we talked earlier about having more dedicated NCACPA staff helping the network groups. And so part of that will be in the area of recruiting from that item. But one thing we hope to do is get the groups that are more successful at it to share how they do that with the groups that are challenged with it. And so it's not going to be something we solve overnight. It's not going to be solved overnight, but we do believe it's solved through a variety of things. And the other thing is volunteers, you don't have to be a member. If you go back and read the operating procedures. So this is a way to take that friend at work and put your arm around them and says, guess what? We're going to a networking event tonight, okay? And you don't have to worry about whether they're a member or not. You can just bring them on. And so that should make people a lot more easier to be able to do that. So hopefully that's just some suggestions on that, but we do think it's a top-down as well as a bottom-up approach.
Well, Scott, in that response, you also touched on a question that we had from Anne, who asked, will volunteers have to be members? And I think we heard no. That's an opportunity perhaps to recruit volunteers for those resource groups or community and networking groups. Mm-hmm. We also have, I guess, a comment here from Colleen or suggestion that perhaps adding advisory to the listing under resource technical, that she observed that it's under markets, but not under technical. And I think in the committee restructure task force, you guys had a lot of debate about that, right, Scott?
Yeah, that one moved around a lot, okay? I had a lot of passion about it, about that. Keep in mind that the market groups can do technical things. So I'd be interested in particularly what technical items they're talking about, but the market groups are not prohibited from dealing with technical items. So we don't want to have the same group in both, because we'd have competing on that. So I think at the end of the day, we would want to look at what additional items that group would do over the marketing one, and either make sure the marketing one covers that or move it. But But I think the purpose on markets was to really think about what are the needs in that group. And currently, there was a lot of excitement in a task force about this is a very large underserved market right now. And a lot of people, if you look over the last 5 to 10 years, have moved into this space. And who's providing services to them? And we didn't see a clear provider of services. So we see this as that area. Technical is an element of that, and it can be done within the market group. But I'd be interested. Feel free to give us some more details on what you have in mind on that. But you're not excluded. Technical isn't only in technical. Technical can actually fit in the market groups very well.
All right. I also see a question here from Dennis. Dennis asks, is the association in financial trouble? Well, Dennis, as a former treasurer and chair, I can assure you that the association is doing quite well financially, even after the pandemic. But I'll invite Mark Sadacek, our Chief Operating Officer, to expand on that a little bit as well.
Thanks, Shawana. Dennis, I appreciate your concern, but as Shawana just said, the association is not in financial difficulty or trouble. But I think one of the hallmarks that you and many of the other members of the association, and even myself before I joined on staff, was the ability for NCACPA to continue to evolve and reinvent itself to continue to enjoy a financial success. So we're just continuing to build, evolve, and adapt to the changing environment.
Thank you, Mark. And Sharon, I saw that you were there as well. Was there anything that you'd like to add?
Well, with respect to Dennis's great question, I certainly echo what Mark had to say. The support of our members and our constituents, especially through the pandemic, and the unbelievable efforts of the NCACPA team to make sure we don't sacrifice service, but also do our best to control expenses. I can't say enough about all the effort that has gone into that. And it's, as Mark said, it's been highly successful. And our board has continued to be very supportive of our efforts and have certainly contributed. So all is well, all is well. We're going to make sure it stays that way. But thank you for the question. Thank you, Shawana. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Sharon, our CEO, Sharon Bryson. And I would say also from a board perspective, we're very excited about investing in the recommendations of the committee restructure task force, because it will require some resources, and we are committed to making sure that implementation is done successfully. I see a question here from Stan Hill. Stan asks, where do you see small firm succession planning resources falling in the resource group structure? This is a much needed area for many NCACPA members who work in firms with 1 or 2 partners, much like myself, Stan. So this is a topic close to my heart. But I think that's a great question. So where do we see firm succession planning falling into this structure?
That's a great question, and exactly why we went to market focus. We wouldn't have focused on that if we weren't thinking about the market. And if you look in the public accounting, you'll see in parentheses, small, medium, and large, and whatever. One of the unanswered questions, and this will evolve over time. At one time, we had a draft that had those being separate markets. But we decided to collapse them at this point to let that resource group work that out. Would it be more appropriate to have a public accounting market group focused on small firms or medium-sized firms, or because we know we clearly get it. The issues are different in each one of those. So moving forward on this, one of the tasks that resource group will have to sort out is, will they continue as one resource group, or will they have maybe subsections within their resource groups that deal with items such as succession planning? Or will we actually break those down at some later date into standalone resource groups? I think that's a question yet to be answered, but it took a lot of debate on the task force before we kind of ended up in that space. But to answer the question shortly, that is exactly the type of items that should be surfacing up through these resource groups, because there are people in the room that are in those firms that understand what those issues are. And that's why the resource groups are so important.
Thank you. And Stan, also thank you for your comments about change in general is never easy. We certainly value the experience of those members who've been with us along this journey as we move forward with this, but it's so necessary for us to adapt and to grow and be responsive to the market and market demands. We have some questions here just about membership. I think both of these are kind of related. Anne asks, what's going to be the motivation for folks to become members of NCACPA? And on that same line, Dennis asked, are we going to add non-CPA membership class to the association? And I think we already have an associate member class that encompasses folks who are not CPAs, but I will just open that other part of that question up to the panel. What's the motivation? What do we see as the motivation?
Let me start, but I really think this is an area Mark and Sharon want to come in. I don't think I want to speak to the association on this topic, but I could tell you the views again from the task force. And that's what I'd like to at least share with that, and then have Mark and Sharon come in here. And that is, the success of the association shouldn't be dependent upon whether you're a member or not. The success of the association should be based on who the association is providing services to. And one of those trends that's clearly coming out there is the fact that people just don't want to pay dues to pay dues. They want to get a value for that arrangement. And so you've seen some of the associations done recently to show the value for my dues. I do appreciate my free CPE on ethics. I just did that last week, so thank you for that. So those are value propositions that we look for. But I think one of the things the association is talking to on the dashboard that Mark puts together about association KPIs is there needs to be a benchmark other than membership number. That's an important number. We need to keep that, but we need to have another benchmark, which is number of individuals served beyond that. And so with that, I'll turn it over to you, Mark, and you can correct anything I said.
No. No, I'm not sure I'm ever in the position to correct the professor, but in this case, I would expand and just provide an example of the resources that NCACPA, where we have invested in creating different opportunities, especially for connections. And what I would reference is our Connect platform as one of the most valuable resources that NCACPA offers. And if you're asking, what's the motivation for becoming a member? And access to that peer learning experience that Connect offers. Just thinking about, and especially referencing, Stan coming from a small firm practitioner perspective, where, practitioners, especially in the public sector, are being asked to know so much more and get their hands on so much more information so quickly. Being able to lean on those peers, and we have so many incredible knowledge resources on that platform, that if you think about it just from a dollars and cents, a billable hour perspective, you can ask a question on Connect and receive maybe not only just the direct answer, but at least reference points, literature, practice aids, etc., right at your fingertips. And you have now, in that billable hour or a couple hours that you would have spent researching it yourself, just realize that value instantaneously. So, again, that's just one example. But again, the resources that NCACPA is continuing to invest in to provide to its members, to the profession as a whole, I think what you're going to see is that motivation is going to be clearly explained and just now going forward. Sharon, I didn't want to get into the advocacy area, but I know that's would love to hear you speak on that and the value we bring there.
Without doubt, Mark, thank you very much. A big effort that we are, our entire team is engaged in right now relates to member and constituent outreach. And so what we're hearing is there's a definite motivation to be part of the organization because of advocacy. And there's no question that advocacy needs more and more attention. And we have hired a director of advocacy, Robert Broom. Many of you hear from Robert. You certainly do on Connect because he's incredibly responsive to questions, and it is a major benefit. And again, in the outreach visits we're engaged in, not only do we get many questions about advocacy efforts, but people want to talk about the talent war and how we can assist with recruitment and retention, because the pipeline issue is of major concern to everyone. And it's Mark and I talked about this the other day. When we engage in these visits with our constituents and with our members, we realize how much we're doing that our members and constituents aren't aware of. So again, it's our job to keep moving and keep involving you in our efforts, but also to make you aware. So hopefully, once you learn more about what we're doing and what we're doing on your behalf and on behalf of the profession, again, you'll be motivated to be involved and be part of this organization. So that's my rah-rah elevator speech.
Thank you, Sharon. Absolutely. So much value that goes beyond just the payment of dues or for continuing education and connection, advocacy, resources, just to name a few. John Stevenson had a question. It said, from GAA, where are the members that are looking to be on the committee? I have not seen a list. I think he's speaking about the sharing of those potential members to those resource groups.
Well, I think the answer to the question is the association hasn't proactively managed a list. And I think that's what we're talking about here. And what we found out was each committee sort of approached it a little differently. And some committees, totally transparent, didn't think it was their responsibility as well. And so one of the responsibilities of each resource group is to fill their resource group. And so that's why I mentioned earlier about, kind of a bottom up, tops down. There will be certain things that are going on at the association level to help encourage people to volunteer, to communicate what the volunteer activities are. And there's going to be some activities that will be directed at the resource groups directly to be able to do that. So that's part of this, is actually having a process to be able to do that. Because I think one of the things that the task force identified was it wasn't the same as we went across and looked at the various committees. It was different.
Well, here's I think a really great question, because we touched on the fact that to make all of this work, of course, it's going to require the time and energy of our volunteers, but it's also going to require some time from our staff. And so the question is, what are the staffing changes that are being made really in result or in support of this? Sharon?
The good news is all of our staff members, all of our team members are going to play a role in this. They're going to provide support in some way, shape, or form to our networking groups and also our resource groups. And as Scott mentioned earlier, Mark, in his role as COO, has done a wonderful job of aligning responsibilities to these groups with our team members. And I've always believed that working with our volunteers in a committee capacity and now in a networking group and resource group capacity is the best training there is for anyone involved in an association. It's how you get to know, it's how you learn to listen and how you learn to act on what the needs are and provide that information in an efficient, effective way. So again, the good news is the wealth, it will be spread, and we'll have a lot of communication going on, which Scott mentioned as he was going through the slide deck. It will be imperative for us as a team to share what we're hearing, because again, this listening piece is going to be so fundamental to this process. And we'll all learn and we'll all, I believe, do a better job of serving our members and our constituents in the process. So Mark, you may have something you want to add to that in terms of our team and the involvement.
The only thing I would add, because Sharon, I think you hit the nail on the head with so much of that, is getting a little bit more detailed. Every resource group, networking group is going to have 2 to 3 members of staff who will be assigned. The staff will have various roles in supporting those groups, but we are spreading it out. No one person will have more than 2 or 3 at the most resource groups that they're involved with. But again, spreading that out to ensure that every member of NCACPA staff is involved with a resource group or networking group in some way, shape, or form. The other part that we are doing on staff is working to create, again, investing in the system and the platform to administer a lot of the operating procedures that Scott referenced in the manual. How do we administer this more effectively? And so we are investing and will be investing in building a platform out that will make resource group, network group administration a whole lot easier, much more transparent for everyone involved.
Thank you, Mark and Sharon. And I think part of the story to be told there is just the investment that the association is making in kind of rebuilding and expanding from our rather conservative measures during the pandemic, and understanding that this is part of the future and investing in personnel and resources to make it successful. And we're coming up on the end of our time. There are a couple of other questions that are still in the queue that, and Holly, correct me if I'm wrong, that we can share the responses to those following the town hall. But I did want to be respectful of everyone's time unless we have an additional 30 minutes for those who want to hang on. So I am getting a note there that we, for those who want to hang on for these, we'll go ahead and we'll respond to them. So just jumping back in, there is a question that kind of circles back to what you were speaking on the advocacy side, Sharon. The question is, will advocacy encompass lobbying GASB and FASB about standards that are becoming more and more complex and costly for entities to implement?
Great question, John. And I know that's something we talked about when you were involved with the recent meeting that many members of the Governmental Accounting and Auditing Committee participated in with the AICPA. Your question is a wonderful example of the expansion, if you will, of our advocacy efforts as we respond to these technical drafts, these exposure drafts, because it's been, for lack of a better phrase, a little too siloed. Because this advocacy initiative, and Robert Broom is certainly aware of this, it's not just state-based, it's federal-based, it depends on where the issue stems from. And so the long answer to your short question is yes. I can see, John, in your role as leader of the GAA committee, that this is something that we will take on. Excuse me, the resource group. I got to get my semantics right here. Sorry, Scott. But yes, and I think that the possibilities are essentially endless in terms of how we respond and represent our constituents and our members. So great question. A great example of what we can do.
Oh, thank you, Sharon. I also see a follow-up question here from Colleen, and it circles back to, I think, part of what you touched on before, Scott, but she asked, if connection is through a networking group, what is next, or what is the next step for helping? What is the steering group and how is it selected? What are its responsibilities, et cetera? Are there other opportunities to help with networking initiatives without being on the steering group? And what are you wanting to recruit volunteers for specifically in the upcoming year? So that quite a few questions in there.
I think there's 6 questions in there. I think I was counting. I think we got more than one, but yeah, all very good questions. Okay. So simplicity, the steering committee of each networking group is really the organizing function of that network. And that network will decide what they need as a steering committee. Depending on what that network is and how big, it will decide what it needs as a steering committee. How many? 2, 3, 4, 5. It depends on what they think they need to be able to manage what they're doing. So that they will decide who they want to be able to do that. Everyone else is just part of the network. And it could be for a particular item, maybe you may not even be part of the steering committee group, but maybe there's a particular activity you're doing that you could take the lead in. So it doesn't mean you're just showing up. There's going to be a lot of opportunities because the network groups, even though they have NCACPA staff, are going to be very much self-directed on what they want to do. They're going to talk about what they want to communicate. They're going to talk about the type of activities they want to do, and they're going to make it happen. And so there's going to be a lot of opportunities for the volunteers in the networking, geography, and community groups to do the things that particularly is why they came together to be able to do that. So that's and I said earlier, some of the network groups don't have a steering committee now, and some do. So that's one of the things we have to do. We have a little chicken and egg there. We're going to have to figure out how to get a steering committee into some of the networks that don't have them. We'll probably kind of look at. There's probably been some informal groups out there. A couple of people sort of took the lead in those areas that can be the seed to be able to go forward on that. So that's sort of what the role of the steering committee is, and it's also then creates the main, again, back to what Mark talked about, the NCC staff. Then there's a connectivity point between the networking group and the staff. There needs to be that connectivity point. It can't be to 30 volunteers. There needs to be a main connectivity point between the networking groups and the staff. So the committee serves that role to be able to do that. There were some other questions in there that I didn't answer. I know I didn't.
I think you hit on the main ones there, Scott. And for those of you who are hanging on with us, thank you for that. I was reminded that this WebEx is being recorded. And so if you're unable to hang with us here to the end, it will be made available for you to go back and view and to hear these questions here toward the end. But before we get there, I see Martha had a question here, and she said that she's been on the Accounting Education Committee for over 15 years. Thank you, Martha, for your service. And chair for 6 of those, and that they found that getting volunteers was hard, and folks get comfortable on committees, and volunteers are slim. I know we touched on before our efforts to actively recruit for volunteers in this new model, and being more deliberate about that. Were there any other thoughts or comments or opinions that we had relative to Martha's comment?
Well, again, I'm going to build on what I talked about. I think in the past, we've waited till people come to us to volunteer as opposed to reach out to them. So in the case, particularly with this scenario, what I've seen work and some, again, just some suggestions is if we do have an issue with particularly the technical, because that's kind of a unique skill, if you sort of think about the technical, we should be very clear about reaching out to the various firms that we have. Sharon talks about all the networking visits they're making. One of the things that can easily be communicated during these visits is, we have a particular need on our accounting auditing group or our period group. Wouldn't it be great for some of your employees to be part of that initiative? Okay, so one part of this is gathering what the needs are. I'm not sure we've got the need list first. So let's get the need list first, and then let's figure out the various ways to go market it. And by the way, I don't want to infer that this is easy, okay? But I think there's some known paths we can go down, some things we can try to be able to do that. And one thing I haven't seen, I've been in a variety of different states in this area, is that once you communicate, the doors are open, and you're really looking, particularly for what I call the younger members or people that are trying to get involved. it opens a door for them, because what a lot of times from an outsider, they appear to be closed. She talked about the number of years that you're on that committee, the number of whatever else. And that they may be, the number of years may be on there because sometimes the committee member feels trapped and doesn't know how to get off. Okay, sometimes it is, they love it, it's a passion, they can't think of anything else. But to the outside, that's viewed as no openings. And so we need to be able to demonstrate the doors are open. Please come. And I think that's one of the major things. I don't know if Mark or Sharon want to comment on that, but that would be the way I respond to that.
I totally agree with that, Scott. And I think that the only add-on comment I would make is not only is it important for people to know the door is open, there's also very often a need for an invitation to walk through that door. And I'm certainly not implying, Martha, that you haven't extended the invitation. And as Scott said, it's not always easy, but we're going to join arms and hands and whatever here and assist with this in any way we can.
Thank you, Sharon. And that's so true. The power of the invitation and the ask. Some people may feel like they may not be particularly qualified, but they have a perspective. And, you know, volunteering is an opportunity to learn and to grow. So we'll definitely leverage the power of that invitation.
Shawana, to that point, and Sharon is probably upset the day she called me, but I'm involved because Sharon asked me. She may regret that day, but anyway, I just
We're all thankful, Scott.
Yeah, right. There may be others that regret it as well, but I'm here because of the ask.
I am too.
Yeah.
So, all good. And lastly, here's a thought or from G. Weldon, saying that the thought was that she thinks that the staff and resource groups and networking groups would be well served if we asked a successful volunteer coordinator to speak to us and provide guidance on recruiting volunteers, and the do's and the don'ts, I guess. One thing that I've always been really proud about this association is we're good at pulling in resources and expertise when needed. But can you speak more to that, Mark?
Yeah, Janine, thank you so much for the thought, posting that here. I think it's a great idea. And I think as we begin to plan the Future Forward Leader Series, the second and third iteration of that, this might be a great topic for us to include from a presentation standpoint, practical application, whether it is from a resource group leader, staff side, so that we really can, because I think the questions, a lot of the themes that we've heard from the questions here today is around that recruitment of volunteers. So thank you for putting it out there, Janine. You know, we might call on you because you've done a great job with the financial planning networking group. So again, thank you for posting that. We'll definitely add that to the list of things that we need to talk about in the programs coming up.
Very good. And with that, it appears that we have come to the end of our post-it questions. Checking the chat here as well. It looks like several folks had to jump off. But thank you so much to Scott for presenting again in such detail, and for Mark and Sharon for your insight in responses to those questions. We understand that this is a journey, and we're, as to use Scott's analogy, we're in the boat and we're rowing together toward the best association that we can be. The success of this is really dependent on all of you, all of the volunteers, and we're going to be certainly listening, as Sharon often says, listening so that we understand what's working, what needs to be adjusted. We're going to be actively recruiting so that we give folks an opportunity to really dive in and volunteer in a meaningful way. And our ultimate goal is for this association and certainly our profession to remain a sustainable organization for now and beyond. So Thank you all. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your interest and participation. And we look forward to hearing more from you as we roll out all of these wonderful recommendations. Thank you all.